Okay, so now that you understand what a salt is, how a salt dissolves in water, and what salinity is, and how salinity can vary throughout the oceans, let's look at why that salinity actually matters to the things that live in the ocean. So all of this stuff matters, salinity matters because of this process called osmosis. Okay, and osmosis is the movement of water from areas where there's high water concentration to areas where there's low water concentration. It might be easier to think of it in terms of salinity. So you can think of it as water moving from where there is low salinity towards where there is high salinity. So water basically likes to be at this thing called equilibrium, where you have equal parts of salt and water spread throughout whatever container you're in, or like in the ocean, or in terms of animal cells. So let's kind of look at this briefly. So let's say that we have a beaker. Okay, here's our beaker, and it's full of water. Okay, and let's say we're going to put a semi-permeable membrane down the middle of this beaker and separate these two little pieces of water. A semi-permeable membrane is a membrane that will allow certain things through, but not other things. And one of the things that we're going to say is able to go through this membrane is water. Okay, and so we have our water and our semi-permeable membrane. And then the blue dots that I'm going to draw will represent the salt ions that are dissolved into the water. So water likes to be at this thing called equilibrium, where it has equal amounts of water and salt on either side of this membrane. So if this side, the left side, has a, let's say, 8 pieces of salt in it, salt ions, then it is at equilibrium if the other side also has 8 pieces of salt dissolved in it, okay, or 8 ions. So when water it has equal concentrations of salt and water on either side of a semi-permeable membrane, we say that it is at equilibrium. Okay, so it's at equilibrium. And if we were to take this in terms of a cell, if we were to say that like this side represents like being inside of a cell, okay, and this represents being outside of a cell. So like if you just have a cell in the ocean, okay, a single cell in the ocean, then this left half would represent the concentration of salts and stuff inside of the cell, and this on the right half would represent the concentration of salts outside of the cell and the salt water around it. So if you're at equilibrium and you have equal parts salt and water inside the cell and outside the cell, we say that the solution is isotonic. Okay, so isotonic. So you have equal parts salt and water inside and outside of the cells. So let's look at that same thing. Okay, look at what happens when you don't have equal parts of salt and water inside and outside of the cell. So again, here's our water, okay, and then our semi-permeable membrane, okay, and we're again going to say that this is inside the cell and this is outside the cell, okay, and again the blue dots will represent our salt. So if you have, let's say, again, 8 things of salt inside of the cell, okay, pieces of salt in the cell, and then let's say that you only have 3 outside of the cell. Water wants to be at equilibrium, and so the water is going to move through this membrane because the water can move through the membrane, but the salt can't. And water will move through the membrane to try and reach equilibrium. And so what it's actually going to do, water is going to move from outside of the cell towards the inside of the cell because there's more salt in here, less salt out here, and water can move. So the water is going to move through and come this way. Oh, sorry, that's kind of confusing. The salt's not going to move. The water is going to move inside of the cell. Okay, and so what's going to happen is the water on this side is going to decrease the amount of water, and the water on this side is going to increase. You're going to get a change in the amount of water that's present. Okay, so the water is going to go down. Okay, the water is going to go up over here. All right. So it's going to go up. You get the idea. So the water is going to move. When you have a solution that has less salt outside of the cell than inside, we call that a hypotonic solution. Okay, so it's called hypotonic. Let's look at one other thing that can happen. So if we have, again, our beaker, again, our semi-permeable membrane, our water, okay, and again, our salt molecules. Okay, so let's put lots of salt outside of the cell. And again, this is inside of the cell, this is outside in the surrounding seawater. Now you have more salt outside of the cell than inside, and so the water from inside the cell is going to move to the outside in order to try and dilute the salt concentration out here and to try and reach equilibrium. When you have more salt outside of the cell than inside, it's called a hypertonic solution. Okay, hyper means like more. If you think of somebody who's hyper, they're super, super excited or have a lot of energy. So a hypertonic solution is when there's more salt outside of the cell than inside. So let's actually look at what happens in your body. So this is a red blood cell, okay, and your red blood cells are in your blood, and you have a lot of liquid in your blood. And so again, the salt is represented by the blue dots. And so this on the left is when the blood cell is isotonic to the surrounding fluid of your blood. The water is going to move back and forth across this membrane, but it's going to move equally because there's equal amounts of salt and water inside the cell and outside. If you were to become dehydrated, okay, and not drink enough water, you are going to have more salt outside of the cell, okay, than inside of your red blood cell. And your red blood cell is going to try and give up water to the surrounding fluid of your blood to try and get to equilibrium. And so it's going to, that red blood cell is basically going to shrivel up, okay, which you can see in the picture. If you were to drink water too quickly, so you drank too much water too fast, you would absorb that water into your bloodstream. And when you do that, you're actually going to have more salt inside of your cells than outside of your red blood cells. And the water is going to move into your red blood cells, and your red blood cells are going to swell up, and they can actually burst. So you can actually die from drinking too much water too quickly because of this concept of osmosis.